Imagine this. Big Shaq walks into a luxury store, ready to make a big purchase, but instead of being greeted with respect, he's judged by his appearance and kicked out. What happens next? A bold move so unexpected, so jaw-dropping, it leaves the entire store and the internet speechless. This isn't just about revenge. It's a masterclass in turning disrespect into something unforgettable. You won't believe what he does to change everything. Let us know where you're watching from in the comments. We love hearing from you. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and join the family for more inspiring stories. The automatic doors of the luxury store slid open, and Shaq stepped inside, his towering frame immediately drawing attention. The faint chime of an entrance bell seemed almost out of place in the hushed, refined atmosphere. Rows of sparkling glass displays reflected the soft glow of recessed lighting, casting an almost ethereal sheen over the showroom. Salespeople, dressed in perfectly tailored suits, moved with precision, their polished shoes clicking against the gleaming marble floor. Shaq looked out of place in his oversized hoodie, baggy jeans, and well-worn sneakers. His gold chain glinted faintly under the lights as he casually adjusted the headphones draped around his neck. He strolled through the store with the ease of someone who wasn't fazed by the silent stares that followed him. The rich aroma of leather and polished wood filled the air, mingling with the faint floral notes of a luxury fragrance on display near the entrance. Behind the main counter, Lisa, the store manager, glanced up from her meticulously organized paperwork. Her sharp eyes scanned Shaq from head to toe, her lips curling into a faint, disapproving smirk. She leaned toward her assistant, Kevin, a younger employee who was nervously rearranging an assortment of designer handbags. "Watch him," Lisa whispered, her tone low but loaded with insinuation. "We don't need him. Browsing too long." Kevin hesitated, his hands pausing mid-air. "But isn't that—" "I know who he is," Lisa cut in sharply, her voice a whisper that could slice through glass. "Famous or not, he doesn't belong here." Unaware of their exchange, or perhaps unfazed by it, Shaq approached a glass display case showcasing an array of gleaming watches. His eyes lingered on a particular piece, an elegant timepiece with a sleek platinum finish. He nodded approvingly, tapping the case lightly to get the attention of a nearby salesperson. The young woman hesitated, glancing toward Lisa for direction before approaching reluctantly. "Excuse me," Shaq said, his voice warm and polite. "Could I see that one?" The woman hesitated, her polished demeanor faltering as Lisa's sharp voice rang out from behind the counter. "Sophia, step back, I'll handle this." Lisa walked over, her heels clicking like a metronome on the marble floor. She stopped a few feet from Shaq, her expression a blend of forced politeness and barely veiled contempt. Her hands clasped in front of her, fingers adorned with rings that caught the light like tiny daggers. "That's a very exclusive piece," Lisa said, her tone measured but condescending. "Are you sure it's what you're looking for?" Shaq's easy smile didn't waver. "Looks good to me," he said, his voice calm and steady. "Let me try it on." Lisa didn't move. "It's quite expensive," she added, her voice dropping slightly, as if she were delivering a confidential warning. "Perhaps you'd like to consider something more accessible." Shaq raised an eyebrow, the smile still on his face, but a flicker of something sharper passed through his eyes. "You think I can't afford it?" he asked, his tone light but laced with an edge that made Kevin glance nervously between the two. Lisa hesitated for a fraction of a second before recovering. "I didn't mean that," she said, though her tone suggested otherwise. "It's just, we have policies. I'll need confirmation before I can let you handle it." The air grew heavier, and an uncomfortable silence spread through the store. Other shoppers pretended not to notice but couldn't help casting furtive glances toward the exchange. Kevin shuffled uneasily, his hands tightening around the bag he was holding. Shaq took a small step back, tilting his head slightly as he studied Lisa. His smile returned, this time wider but colder. "That's all right," he said finally, his voice carrying a calmness that seemed almost rehearsed. "I'll take my business somewhere else." Before Lisa could respond, Shaq turned and walked toward the door, His stride was slow, deliberate, each step echoing louder than the last. At the door he paused and looked back, his smile now replaced by a look of quiet confidence. "You'll regret this," he said simply before disappearing through the doors, leaving behind a silence that felt louder than anything he could have said. Lisa watched the doors slide shut behind Shaq, her smirk returning as she turned back toward the counter. "See?" she said to Kevin, her tone dripping with self-satisfaction. "He didn't belong here. People like that always cause a scene." Kevin didn't respond. His eyes lingered on the door, a flicker of unease crossing his face. He had recognized Shaq immediately, as had several of the customers in the store, who now whispered among themselves. Kevin felt a knot tightening in his stomach, a sense that what had just happened was far from over. Meanwhile, outside the store, Shaq stepped into the crisp air, adjusting the headphones around his neck. His expression remained calm, but there was a fire behind his eyes, one that hinted at something brewing beneath the surface. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and made a call. "It's me," he said, his voice low but purposeful. "I need a favor." He paused, listening to the voice on the other end before a small, knowing smile crept onto his face. "Yeah, it's gonna be big. I'll text you the details." As he walked down the street, his stride was steady, his thoughts sharp. He didn't feel anger, he rarely let people like Lisa get to him. But there was something about the way she had spoken, the way she had dismissed him without even trying to mask her disdain, that stayed with him. This wasn't just about the watch anymore. This was about sending a message bigger than himself. He turned a corner and entered a cozy cafe. The barista behind the counter beamed when she saw him. "Shaq!" she exclaimed, her excitement genuine. "What brings you here?" "Just needed some good coffee," he said, flashing his signature grin. "And maybe a little inspiration." He took a seat by the window, sipping his drink and glancing at the phone in his hand. A series of notifications popped up, messages from friends, a few fans on social media who had already caught wind of the incident and were tagging him in posts. He chuckled to himself. News traveled fast, especially when it came to someone like him. As he scrolled through the messages, his eyes caught one in particular. It was from an old friend, someone he hadn't spoken to in years. The message read, "Need anything, big guy? Heard what happened. Let me know how I can help." Shaq leaned back in his chair, the faint hum of the cafe filling the space around him. He tapped out a reply. "I'm good for now, but you'll hear from me soon." Outside, the city buzzed with life, but Shaq's mind was laser-focused. He wasn't the type to let petty slights consume him, but this time was different. This wasn't just about being disrespected. It was about making a point, one that no one would forget. He stood up, drained the last of his coffee, and left a generous tip on the counter. "Thanks for the coffee," he said with a wink to the barista. As he stepped back onto the bustling sidewalk, his phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from one of his business partners. "Everything's in place, just say the word." Shaq's smile returned, broader this time. He slid his phone back into his pocket and began walking, his long strides carrying him toward a destination only he knew. Whatever Lisa and her store thought they had gained by turning him away, they were about to learn just how wrong they were. Back at the luxury store, Lisa paced behind the counter, her stiletto heels clicking against the polished marble. The smug satisfaction she'd felt earlier had begun to wane, replaced by a faint sense of unease as whispers among the customers grew louder. A few of them had pulled out their phones, their hushed conversations punctuated with words like, "Shaq," "Huge mistake," and, "Did you see what just happened?" Kevin stood near the handbags display, his hands fidgeting nervously. He glanced toward Lisa, who had her arms crossed and a stern expression that did little to mask her uncertainty. Finally, summoning what little courage he had, Kevin spoke. Lisa," he began, his voice hesitant. "I think that was a bad idea. You know who he is, right?" Lisa shot him a sharp glare. "Of course I know who he is," she snapped. But that doesn't give him the right to waltz in here like he owns the place. He wasn't serious about buying anything. Kevin shifted uncomfortably, avoiding her gaze. But what if he was? He didn't seem upset, just determined. Lisa scoffed, waving a dismissive hand. Please. He's just another entitled celebrity who thinks he's above the rules. He'll forget about this by tomorrow. Kevin wasn't so sure. The look Shaq had given them before leaving wasn't one of defeat. It was something else entirely, something that made Kevin feel uneasy. He opened his mouth to say more, but a sudden burst of laughter from a group of customers near the jewelry counter interrupted him. Unbelievable, one of them said, holding up their phone. Shaq just posted something. It's already blowing up. Lisa's head snapped up. What did he post? She demanded, striding over to the group. They hesitated, exchanging glances before one of them reluctantly held out their phone. On the screen was a short video clip. Shaq standing outside the store, shaking his head with a wry smile. The caption read, "Judged by my outfit, not my heart. Don't worry, stay tuned. This story isn't over." The video had already garnered thousands of likes and comments with phrases like, "Class act," "Can't wait to see what he does next," and "That store's about to regret everything." Lisa's face turned pale as she handed the phone back. She turned toward Kevin, her eyes narrowing. "This is nothing," she said, more to herself than to him. "Social media blows everything out of proportion. It'll pass." But Kevin could see the worry creeping into her expression, no matter how hard she tried to hide it. He returned to his station, stealing glances at the customers, who were now buzzing with anticipation, their curiosity about Shaq's next move, adding an almost electric charge to the air. Meanwhile, Shaq was already 2 steps ahead. He sat in the back seat of a sleek black SUV, his phone buzzing with notifications. Messages poured in from fans, friends, and even a few reporters asking for comments on the video he'd posted. He ignored most of them, focusing instead on a group chat with his team. "It's all set," read one message. "Everything will be ready by tomorrow morning." Shaq's lips curved into a sly grin. He typed back, "Good. Let's make it unforgettable." He leaned back in his seat, gazing out at the city skyline as it glittered against the evening sky. The luxury store had underestimated him, but they were about to learn a lesson they wouldn't forget. This wasn't just about setting the record straight. It was about showing everyone watching, both inside and outside the store, that respect wasn't something you could put a price on. The next morning, the luxury store opened its doors as usual. The atmosphere inside was as polished and pristine as ever, with gleaming glass displays and immaculately dressed sales staff moving through the space like clockwork. But something was different. The employees felt it, and so did the early customers who browsed through the aisles with hushed voices, glancing frequently toward the entrance. It was an air of anticipation, like the calm before a storm. Lisa stood behind the counter, her expression tighter than usual. The video Shaq had posted was still spreading online, picking up steam overnight. By now, everyone in the store knew about it, though most were too afraid to bring it up in front of her. Kevin, however, couldn't help sneaking nervous glances at his phone, where the comments section of Shaq's post was exploding with reactions. "Can't wait to see what he does. This is gonna be epic. Stay tuned, folks." "I'd hate to be that store manager right now." Kevin sighed, his unease growing. He glanced at Lisa, who was busy inspecting a shipment of high-end jewelry with her usual air of authority, but even she couldn't hide the tension in her posture. The morning passed quietly, the usual parade of wealthy clients moving through the store without incident. Lisa started to relax, convincing herself that the whole ordeal had blown over. She even allowed herself a small, self-satisfied smile as she dealt with a particularly demanding customer. Then the first car arrived. It was a sleek black SUV with tinted windows, pulling up to the curb in front of the store. Lisa noticed it through the large glass windows, but thought nothing of it at first. After all, expensive cars weren't exactly unusual in this part of town. But when the driver stepped out and opened the passenger door, revealing Shaq's unmistakable towering figure, Lisa froze. Shaq stepped onto the sidewalk dressed in a sharp, custom-tailored suit that exuded confidence and style. His polished shoes gleamed under the morning sun, and his signature grin was firmly in place. He was flanked by two assistants, each carrying sleek leather briefcases. A small crowd had already started to gather outside the store, their murmurs growing louder as they recognized him. Inside, Kevin's jaw dropped. "He's back," he whispered to himself, his heart pounding. Lisa, on the other hand, felt a wave of heat rise to her face. She straightened her posture, refusing to show any sign of intimidation. Shaq didn't rush. He took his time, pausing to greet fans who had gathered on the sidewalk. He posed for a few pictures, exchanged some laughs, and even high-fived a young boy wearing an oversized basketball jersey. All the while, the crowd outside continued to swell, their excitement palpable. Finally, Shaq made his way to the entrance. The automatic doors slid open, and the entire store seemed to hold its breath as he stepped inside. He paused just beyond the threshold, taking a moment to survey the space. The contrast between his confident demeanor and the tense silence of the staff was almost comical. Lisa was the first to recover. She walked toward him, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. Her smile was thin, forced and brittle. "Mr. O'Neill," she said, her voice smooth but laced with tension. "Welcome back. How can we assist you today?" Shaq tilted his head slightly, his grin widening as he looked down at her. "Oh, I'm not here to shop," he said, his deep voice carrying effortlessly across the room. "I'm here to make an announcement." Lisa's smile faltered. "An announcement?" she echoed, her tone uncertain. Shaq turned to face the growing crowd outside, many of whom had their phones raised, recording every moment. He spread his arms wide, his voice booming with authority and humor. "Ladies and gentlemen, today's a special day. I've decided to make some changes around here." Lisa's brow furrowed, confusion and irritation battling for dominance. "What exactly are you talking about?" she asked, her tone sharper now. Shaq turned back to her, his smile never wavering. "You'll see," he said with a wink. Then, with a deliberate gesture, he nodded to one of his assistants, who stepped forward and opened one of the briefcases. Inside were stacks of official-looking documents, each one bearing the logo of the store's parent company. Lisa's eyes widened as she recognized them immediately. Purchase agreements, legal contracts, and other paperwork she was all too familiar with. Shaq leaned down slightly, meeting Lisa's stunned gaze. "Let's just say I've decided to invest in this place," he said, his voice calm but filled with undeniable power. "And as of this morning, I'm your new landlord." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Lisa took a step back, her composure cracking as she struggled to process what he had just said. The murmurs among the staff and customers turned into outright gasps. Kevin, standing off to the side, couldn't hide his grin. Shaq straightened, turning his attention to the rest of the store. "Now, don't worry," he said, addressing everyone with a reassuring tone. "I'm not here to ruin anyone's day. In fact, I think we can make this place a whole lot better." The crowd outside erupted into cheers, their excitement spilling into the store as Shaq's words signaled the beginning of something no one had expected. Lisa's face turned a shade paler as Shaq's words echoed in her ears. She opened her mouth to respond, but nothing came out. Her carefully curated authority had evaporated, leaving her exposed and visibly rattled. Meanwhile, the rest of the store buzzed with disbelief, excitement, and, for some, a sense of vindication. Shaq walked deeper into the store, his every step deliberate, his imposing presence filling the space. He gestured toward his assistants, who began distributing the documents to nearby employees and customers. "These," he said with a grin, "are part of a plan that'll change everything here for the better. I'm not just taking over, I'm giving back." Lisa finally found her voice, though it trembled slightly. "You can't just walk in here and change everything," she stammered, forcing a smile that looked more like a grimace. "There are rules, policies." Shaq interrupted, raising an eyebrow. His tone was still light, but there was an unmistakable firmness beneath it. "Like the one where you decide who's good enough to shop here based on how they look?" He glanced around the room, his gaze landing on Kevin, who quickly averted his eyes. Lisa bristled, her pride flaring. "That's not what happened," she protested, though her voice lacked conviction. "We treat all our customers with respect." Shaq finished for her, his deep voice cutting through the air like a blade. He let the question hang for a moment before turning back to the crowd, his smile returning. "Let's just say I've seen enough to know things need to change." One of his assistants stepped forward, holding up a clipboard with a bold logo on the top page. "Effective immediately," the assistant announced. "Mr. O'Neill has acquired this property. The store will remain open during the transition, but there will be a complete review of its policies, practices, and management." Lisa's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. You can't do this," she said, her voice cracking slightly. Shaq smiled, leaning slightly closer to her. "I already did," he said simply. Kevin, standing off to the side, couldn't contain himself any longer. "So wait," he said, stepping forward, his voice hesitant but filled with curiosity. "You really bought the store, just like that?" Shaq turned to him, his grin widening. "That's right," he said. "But it's not just about buying it, it's about what comes next." He clapped a hand on Kevin's shoulder, nearly making the smaller man stumble under the weight. "People like you're the reason I'm doing this. You don't deserve to work in a place that makes you feel like you have to look the other way when something's wrong." Kevin blinked, stunned, as a wave of emotions washed over him. I don't know what to say," he stammered. "Say you'll stick around and help me turn this place into something better," Shaq said, his tone warm and encouraging. "Sound good?" Kevin nodded quickly, his expression a mix of relief and gratitude. Yeah, that sounds good." Shaq gave him a pat on the back before addressing the rest of the room. "Here's the deal," he said, his voice carrying effortlessly over the murmurs of the crowd. "This store isn't just going to sell luxury. It's going to stand for something. Respect, fairness, and giving back to the community. That starts today." The crowd outside, which had been growing steadily larger, broke into cheers. Inside, the tension seemed to ease as employees and customers alike began to process what was happening. For some, it was a shock. For others, it was a long overdue wake-up call. Lisa, however, wasn't ready to back down. She squared her shoulders, her voice rising above the din. "You can't just waltz in here and act like you're some kind of hero," she snapped. "Do you have any idea how much this place is worth? How hard I've worked to—" Shaq held up a hand, silencing her. "I know exactly how much it's worth," he said, his tone calm but firm. "But you know what it's really worth? Nothing, if the people running it don't know how to treat others with decency." Lisa stared at him, her face a mix of anger and disbelief. She opened her mouth to argue, but Shaq had already turned away, addressing the rest of the room once more. "There's more to life than money," he said, his deep voice resonating. "And there's more to success than just selling expensive stuff. Starting today, this store is about more than luxury. It's about lifting people up." The room erupted into applause, led by the customers and employees who had witnessed the previous day's events firsthand. Kevin clapped the loudest, his face alight with a sense of hope he hadn't felt in years. Even some of the more skeptical employees joined in, their walls of indifference beginning to crack. Lisa stood frozen, her world unraveling around her as the cheers grew louder. She had always believed in power and prestige, but now, for the first time, she was faced with a force far greater than her own, a force fueled by humility, kindness, and an unshakable sense of purpose. And Shaq wasn't done yet. This was only the beginning. As the cheers subsided, Shaq turned toward the windows, where the crowd outside had grown into a full-on spectacle. Reporters were now mixed in with fans, their cameras trained on the store. The buzz was undeniable, and Shaq knew this was the perfect moment to solidify his message. He gestured to one of his assistants, who promptly opened the second briefcase. Inside were stacks of papers, but these weren't legal contracts. They were flyers. Shaq took one and held it up, the bold words printed on it catching the light. "Luxury with a purpose, reimagining what matters." This isn't just about selling watches or handbags, Shaq said, his voice steady but impassioned. Starting next month, this store will launch a new program. A percentage of every sale will go directly to funding scholarships, community outreach, and programs for underprivileged kids. And that's just the beginning. A wave of murmurs swept through the store. Kevin's eyes widened as he read over the flyer, and even some of the more skeptical employees leaned in closer, curiosity piqued. Lisa, however, stood rooted in place, her face a mix of shock and barely concealed disdain. Shaq continued, his tone softening but still commanding attention. "When I was a kid, I didn't have much," he said, his voice carrying the weight of his experience. "But I had people who believed in me. Mentors, coaches, teachers. They taught me that success isn't about what you have. It's about what you give back." The room grew quiet, the gravity of his words settling over everyone. Even Lisa seemed momentarily disarmed, her mouth tightening as she listened. Shaq turned toward the employees, his gaze sweeping across them. "This is a chance to make something better," he said. "Not just for the customers who walk in here, but for the community outside these walls. I want you all to be part of it." Kevin, unable to hold back any longer, stepped forward. "You mean we'd actually get to help make these decisions, be part of the changes?" Shaq nodded, his grin returning. "That's right. This isn't just about me. It's about all of us working together." For the first time, a genuine smile broke across Kevin's face. "Count me in," he said firmly. Several other employees began nodding in agreement, murmurs of support spreading through the room. Even those who had been skeptical couldn't deny the energy Shaq was bringing, a sense of purpose that felt contagious. Lisa, however, wasn't ready to concede. She stepped forward, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. "This all sounds very noble," she said, her tone dripping with skepticism. "But do you really think charity is going to pay the bills? This is a luxury store, Mr. O'Neill. Our clientele isn't exactly interested in community outreach." Shaq turned to her, his smile unwavering. "Then maybe it's time we redefine what luxury means," he said. His voice was calm but carried a weight that silenced the room. "Luxury isn't just about expensive things. It's about treating people with dignity. It's about making them feel special, no matter who they are or where they come from." Lisa opened her mouth to respond, but the sound of clapping interrupted her. It started with Kevin but quickly spread through the store as customers and employees alike began applauding Shaq's words. The crowd outside, seeing the commotion through the windows, joined in, their cheers rising like a wave. Shaq raised a hand to quiet the applause, his grin now softer but no less genuine. "This store is going to be more than a place to buy things," he said. "It's going to be a place where people leave feeling better than when they came in. And if that doesn't fit your definition of luxury, then maybe it's time for a new definition." Lisa stood frozen, her carefully constructed world crumbling around her. She had built her career on exclusivity, on keeping people out rather than inviting them in. But now, she was facing something she had never anticipated: the power of inclusion, backed by a man who refused to be underestimated. Shaq turned to her one last time. "You have a choice," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "You can either be part of this change or step aside. But one thing's for sure. This store is going to be something special, with or without you." The silence that followed was deafening. Lisa's face tightened, but she said nothing. The decision hung in the air, unresolved, as Shaq turned back to the room, his broad smile returning. "All right, people," he said, clapping his hands together. "Let's get to work." The room erupted into cheers once more, and for the first time in a long time, the luxury store felt alive. Not with the sterile hum of wealth and exclusivity, but with something far more valuable: hope. Shaq left the store later that morning, the energy of his announcement still crackling in the air. The employees, particularly Kevin, buzzed with cautious excitement as they tried to process what had just happened. For the first time, the store felt less like a fortress of cold luxury and more like a place with real purpose. But for Lisa, the shift was anything but welcome. She retreated to her office, slamming the door behind her. The plush interior, decorated with awards and framed photos of her achievements, suddenly felt smaller, as if the walls were closing in. She paced the room, her heels digging into the thick carpet, her mind racing. "This is ridiculous," she muttered under her breath. "He can't just waltz in here, throw money around and turn this store into some charity project." But even as she tried to dismiss Shaq's vision, she couldn't ignore the tide turning against her. The staff had been invigorated by his words, and the customers seemed to embrace the idea of a store that stood for something more. Even Kevin, the shy, unsure assistant she'd always thought of as dispensable, had found his voice. It made her stomach churn. Her thoughts were interrupted by a sharp knock at the door. "Come in," she snapped, more harshly than she intended. The door opened and Kevin stepped inside, holding one of the flyers Shaq's team had handed out. He looked hesitant but determined, his usual nervousness tempered by a newfound confidence. "What is it, Kevin?" Lisa asked, crossing her arms. He hesitated, glancing at the flyer before meeting her gaze. "I wanted to talk to you. About everything." Lisa raised an eyebrow. "Everything?" she repeated, her tone dripping with skepticism. "Be more specific." Kevin took a deep breath, clutching the flyer like a lifeline. "About the way things have been here," he said, "and how they could change." Lisa's eyes narrowed. "Change? Kevin, this store has been successful for years. We don't need to change anything." "But maybe we do," Kevin said, his voice growing steadier. "Shaq's right. We've been so focused on exclusivity that we've forgotten what really matters. People come here to feel special, but most of the time, we just make them feel small." Lisa's lips tightened into a thin line. "That's how luxury works, Kevin. It's about creating an atmosphere of prestige." "No," Kevin said firmly, surprising even himself. "It's about creating an experience, and that experience doesn't have to come at the expense of respect or kindness. Shaq's showing us that." Lisa stared at him, her expression unreadable. For a moment the room was silent except for the faint hum of the air conditioning. "Do you really believe all this?" she asked finally, her voice low but edged with incredulity. "That we can just change everything and still keep this store afloat?" Kevin nodded, his grip on the flyer tightening. "I do, and I think the others do too. We've just been too afraid to say it." Lisa's eyes flicked to the flyer in his hand, then back to his face. She opened her mouth to respond, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she turned away, staring out the window at the bustling street below. "Thank you for sharing your thoughts, Kevin," she said after a moment, her tone clipped. "You can go now." Kevin hesitated as if he wanted to say more, but he finally nodded and left the room, closing the door quietly behind him. Lisa remained at the window, her reflection staring back at her in the glass. For the first time, she felt the weight of her decisions pressing down on her. Not just the choices she had made that day, but the choices she had made for years. She had built her career on exclusivity, on keeping people out. But now that foundation was beginning to crack, and she wasn't sure if she could hold it together. Outside the office, Shaq's presence was still palpable. The employees spoke in excited tones, exchanging ideas about what the store could become under his vision. Kevin, standing near the counter, felt a surge of hope. For the first time, he believed things could truly change, not just for the store, but for himself. As the day went on, Lisa remained in her office grappling with her thoughts, and while she didn't yet realize it, her decision in the days to come would determine not only her future, but the future of the store itself. The day wore on, and the once familiar rhythm of the store felt completely different. Shaq's departure hadn't ended the buzz of excitement. Instead, it seemed to amplify it. Employees huddled together during their breaks, whispering about his plans and speculating on how things might change. Even customers lingered longer than usual, eager to soak in the store's newfound energy. But behind the scenes, in the privacy of her office, Lisa sat at her desk, staring blankly at the sleek computer screen. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, frozen by the weight of her thoughts. The report she had intended to review sat untouched, overshadowed by Kevin's words and Shaq's unrelenting presence in her mind. Her eyes fell on the flyer Kevin had left on her desk. Luxury with a purpose. Reimagining what matters. The bold words seemed to taunt her, challenging everything she had built her career around. She had spent years climbing the ladder, perfecting the art of exclusivity. To her, luxury had always been about separating the elite from the rest, about creating an unattainable experience that left people longing for more. And now, in a matter of hours, Shaq had unraveled that carefully constructed philosophy. The intercom buzzed, jolting her from her thoughts. Lisa pressed the button, her voice sharp. "What is it?" It's Kevin," came the hesitant reply. "There's someone here to see you." Lisa frowned. "Who?" "He says he's with Mr. O'Neill's team," Kevin said. There was an unmistakable note of excitement in his voice. "And he has some proposals." Lisa's frown deepened, but she straightened her posture. "Fine, send him in." The door opened and a sharply dressed man walked in, carrying a leather portfolio under his arm. He introduced himself as Marcus, one of Shaq's business strategists. His demeanor was calm and professional, but there was a quiet confidence about him that immediately put Lisa on edge. "Good afternoon, Ms. Stanton," Marcus said, taking a seat across from her desk without waiting for an invitation. "Thank you for making the time." Lisa folded her arms, her expression icy. "Let's skip the pleasantries. What is it that you want?" Marcus opened his portfolio, revealing neatly organized documents and charts. "I'm here to discuss the transition plan for the store," he said. "Mr. O'Neill believes it's important for the current management to be involved in the process, provided they're willing to align with the new vision." Lisa's eyes narrowed. "And what exactly is this new vision?" Marcus smiled faintly, as if he had anticipated the question. He slid a document across the desk. "The vision is to redefine luxury, making it inclusive rather than exclusive. We're implementing initiatives like community outreach programs, customer engagement events, and profit-sharing models for employees." Lisa picked up the document, skimming it quickly. Her lips tightened as she read about plans for mentorship programs, local charity partnerships, and staff empowerment workshops. This isn't a store," she said, her voice laced with disbelief. "This is a charity project masquerading as a business." "On the contrary," Marcus replied smoothly, "this is the future of business. Customers want to feel good about where they spend their money. They want to support companies that make a difference. This isn't charity, it's innovation." Lisa set the document down with a sharp motion. "And if I don't agree with these changes?" she asked, her tone daring him to challenge her. Marcus didn't flinch. "Then we'll move forward without you," he said simply. "But Mr. O'Neill hopes it won't come to that. He values the expertise of experienced professionals like yourself." The implication was clear: adapt or be left behind. Lisa's chest tightened as she realized the precariousness of her position. She had always prided herself on being indispensable, but now she was being given a choice she hadn't anticipated. She leaned back in her chair, her gaze hard. "You think you can just waltz in here and turn everything upside down? You don't know what it takes to run a store like this." Marcus met her glare evenly. "And maybe you don't know what it takes to evolve," he said, his tone calm but firm. "The world is changing, Ms. Stanton. Luxury isn't just about exclusivity anymore. It's about experience, connection, and purpose. Mr. O'Neill sees that. Do you?" Lisa's jaw tightened, but she didn't respond. Marcus took that as his cue to stand. He gathered his documents and offered her a polite nod. "Take some time to think it over," he said. "Mr. O'Neill will be back in a few days to review the next steps. He'll want to know where you stand." With that, he left the room, leaving Lisa alone with her thoughts. She stared at the flyer on her desk again, her mind a whirlwind of emotions. For the first time in years, she felt unsure. Unsure of her future, unsure of her beliefs, and unsure of what kind of leader she truly wanted to be. Outside the office, the store hummed with an unfamiliar energy. Kevin worked behind the counter, chatting animatedly with a customer who had overheard Shaq's plans. The employees moved with a sense of purpose, their usual guarded expressions replaced with tentative smiles. Change was already taking root, and Lisa knew she couldn't stop it. The question was, would she embrace it or be swept away by it? The following day, Lisa arrived at the store earlier than usual. The morning sun cast long streaks of light through the glass storefront, illuminating the immaculate displays of luxury goods. For years, she had taken pride in this, how every detail reflected her meticulous standards, her vision of what a premier shopping experience should be. But today she felt uneasy, like she was standing in a world she no longer recognized. The employees trickled in, their demeanor noticeably different. They greeted each other warmly, their usual wariness replaced with something almost foreign to Lisa: optimism. Even Kevin, who often kept his head down and avoided her, gave her a tentative smile as he passed. She didn't return it. At the counter, two sales associates whispered excitedly about Shaq's announcements. "Did you see the post he made last night?" one of them asked. "He's talking about turning this place into a hub for community events. Can you imagine?" The other nodded eagerly. "Yeah, and he mentioned a mentorship program for staff. I mean, what kind of boss does that? It's incredible." Lisa's jaw tightened as she listened from a distance, pretending to inspect a display of handbags. Every word they said felt like a challenge to her authority, a reminder that the world she had built was slipping away. She had worked so hard to create an image of exclusivity, and now it seemed to be unraveling before her eyes. By mid-morning, the store was bustling with customers, many of whom had come not to shop but to catch a glimpse of the store under Shaq's influence. Reporters stood outside, their cameras pointed at the entrance, while curious passers-by stopped to take photos of the displays. The store had never been this busy on a weekday. Lisa stood near the back of the store, watching it all unfold. She couldn't deny the energy was infectious. People were smiling, engaging with the staff, and genuinely enjoying themselves. Even the employees seemed more at ease, their usual scripted politeness replaced with genuine warmth. But for Lisa, the chaos felt like an assault on everything she valued. This wasn't the curated, exclusive experience she had worked so hard to create. It was something else entirely, something she didn't yet understand. She retreated to her office, closing the door behind her. The sound of laughter and conversation faded, leaving her in silence. She sank into her chair, her mind racing. For years, she had believed that exclusivity was the key to success, but now she was being forced to confront a possibility she had never considered. What if she was wrong? Her thoughts were interrupted by another knock at the door. This time, it was Kevin. He peeked in hesitantly, holding a folder in his hands. "Hi, Lisa," he said, his voice careful. "I just wanted to share something with you." Lisa sighed, motioning for him to enter. Kevin stepped inside, placing the folder on her desk. "I've been working on some ideas," he said. "You know, for how we can integrate some of Shaq's changes without completely losing what makes this place special." Lisa raised an eyebrow, opening the folder. Inside were detailed notes and sketches, ideas for customer events, partnerships with local charities, and training programs for staff. It was thorough, thoughtful, and, much to her surprise, impressive. Kevin shifted nervously as she read. "I know it's a lot," he said, "but I think there's a way to combine what you've built with what Shaq wants to create. It doesn't have to be one or the other." Lisa looked up at him, her expression unreadable. "Why are you showing me this?" she asked. "Because I think you care about this place," Kevin said simply, "and because I think you're the one who can make this work." For a moment, Lisa said nothing. She studied Kevin, the earnestness in his expression, the way he seemed so much more confident than he had just days ago. It unsettled her, but it also struck a chord she hadn't felt in years: pride. He was right. She did care about the store, and as much as she hated to admit it, she cared about what happened next. She closed the folder and set it aside. "Thank you, Kevin," she said finally. "I'll take a look at this." Kevin nodded, a flicker of hope crossing his face. "Thanks, Lisa. he said before leaving the office. Alone again, Lisa leaned back in her chair, staring at the folder on her desk. For years, she had believed that her way was the only way. But now, with everything changing around her, she wondered if it was time to let go of the old and embrace the new. The question lingered as the day wore on, and Lisa realized that her choice would not only define her career but also the legacy of the store she had worked so hard to build. The store's atmosphere was buzzing with excitement by the time midday rolled around. Customers flowed in and out, many of them curious onlookers drawn by Shaq's announcements and the media coverage. The usual quiet hum of the luxury store had been replaced with something far livelier. Groups gathered near the counters, discussing the possibilities of what Shaq's vision might bring. Lisa sat in her office, staring blankly at the folder Kevin had left behind. She had opened it again, unable to resist the pull of curiosity. His ideas were meticulous, creative, and surprisingly balanced. Each proposal carefully integrated the store's exclusive brand identity with Shaq's inclusive vision. Lisa hated to admit it, but Kevin had thought it through. He had seen a path she had refused to consider. A knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. This time, it wasn't Kevin. It was Marcus, Shaq's business strategist. He entered the room with the same quiet confidence he'd displayed the day before, carrying another portfolio. "Ms. Stanton," he greeted, taking a seat across from her without waiting for permission. "I trust you've had some time to think." Lisa folded her arms, leaning back in her chair. "If you're here to pressure me into some grand speech about change, don't bother. I've heard enough of that already." Marcus smiled faintly, setting the portfolio on her desk. "I'm not here to pressure you," he said. "I'm here to show you what's at stake." He opened the portfolio, revealing a series of documents and charts. At first glance, they looked like standard sales reports and projections, but as Lisa leaned in, she realized they were far more detailed. Each page showed how Shaq's vision could impact the store, not just in terms of branding, but financially as well. "This is what happens when you adapt," Marcus said, tapping one of the charts. "Higher customer engagement, increased foot traffic, and stronger brand loyalty. Customers don't just want products anymore. They want purpose. They want to feel like their money is making a difference." Lisa studied the numbers, her skepticism giving way to reluctant interest. "And you're sure this will work?" she asked, her voice quieter now. Marcus nodded. "We've seen it work in other industries. The luxury market is shifting, whether you like it or not. You have two options: evolve or be left behind." Lisa hesitated, her gaze flicking between the charts and Marcus. For years, she had prided herself on staying ahead of the curve, but now she felt as though the curve had moved without her. "You've been running this store for a long time," Marcus continued, his tone softening. "You've built something remarkable, but even the strongest foundations need to grow. This isn't about tearing down what you've created. It's about building on it." Lisa leaned back, crossing her arms again. "And what if I refuse? What happens then?" Marcus didn't flinch. "If you refuse, Mr. O'Neill will move forward without you. The store will change with or without your input, but he'd prefer it to be with you." The room fell silent. Lisa felt the weight of his words pressing down on her. She had always believed in control, in holding the reins tightly, but now the reins were slipping. The thought terrified her, but it also intrigued her. What if letting go wasn't a sign of weakness but of strength? "Take some time," Marcus said, closing the portfolio and standing. "Mr. O'Neill will be here tomorrow to finalize the plans. He'll want to hear from you directly." Lisa nodded mutely, and Marcus left the room, leaving her alone once again. She stared at the closed portfolio on her desk, her thoughts a chaotic swirl. She didn't like the idea of change, but she couldn't ignore the possibility that Shaq might be right. As the day wore on, Lisa found herself wandering out of her office and onto the sales floor. She kept to the edges, observing the staff and customers from a distance. The energy was undeniable. Employees who had once moved robotically were now engaging with customers, their smiles genuine. Customers lingered longer, chatting with the staff and each other. The air was filled with something Lisa hadn't felt in years: warmth. Near the jewelry counter, she spotted Kevin assisting an older couple. They were laughing at something he had said, their faces lit with delight as he carefully explained the features of a watch. Lisa watched as the couple purchased the watch, shaking Kevin's hand before leaving with smiles on their faces. Lisa felt a pang of something she couldn't quite name: pride, perhaps, or maybe regret. She had spent so long building walls around this store, around herself, that she had forgotten what it was like to connect with people. As the evening approached, Lisa found herself back in her office, staring at the folder Kevin had left and the portfolio Marcus had brought. For the first time, she felt the tiniest flicker of hope, not just for the store but for herself. The choice before her was daunting, but it was also clear. Lisa had always thought she knew what luxury meant, but now she wasn't so sure. And maybe, just maybe, that was a good thing. The next morning, the store buzzed with even more activity than the day before. The word about Shaq's acquisition had spread like wildfire, drawing in customers, reporters, and curious onlookers. The staff, energized by the prospect of change, moved with a new sense of purpose. Conversations buzzed between employees about potential programs, initiatives, and the excitement of working for someone as inspiring as Shaq. Lisa arrived early, as she often did, but this time her demeanor was different. Gone was the stern, unyielding posture that usually preceded her. Instead, she moved through the store quietly, observing the excitement around her with an expression that flickered between contemplation and unease. Near the entrance, Kevin stood with a group of employees, discussing ideas for a customer engagement event Shaq had mentioned. His confidence was noticeable, his posture upright as he spoke animatedly to the others. Lisa watched from a distance, feeling a strange mixture of pride and self-doubt. She glanced at her watch. It was almost time for Shaq to arrive. When the double doors slid open, a collective hush fell over the store. Shaq entered with his trademark charisma, his sharp suit tailored to perfection, his broad smile lighting up the room. Behind him walked Marcus and a few other members of his team, each carrying tablets and folders. Shaq paused just inside the entrance, taking a moment to greet fans and customers who had gathered to see him. He signed a few autographs, exchanged handshakes, and even posed for photos with a group of young basketball players. The ease with which he moved through the crowd was magnetic, drawing people in without effort. As he approached the central counter, the staff gathered around, their anticipation palpable. Lisa stood slightly off to the side, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, watching the scene unfold. "Good morning, everyone," Shaq boomed, his deep voice filling the space. "First, let me say thank you. Thank you for sticking with us through these changes. I know it's been a lot to take in, but I promise you, it's going to be worth it." A wave of murmured approval rippled through the staff. Shaq's smile widened as he continued, his tone warm and genuine. "This isn't just about making this store better. It's about making it mean something, for you, for our customers, and for the community. And that's only going to work if we do it together." He glanced around the room, his eyes landing on Lisa. "Speaking of working together," he said, his grin softening, "I think it's time we hear from the person who knows this store better than anyone." All eyes turned to Lisa. For a moment she froze, the weight of their gazes pressing down on her. But then she straightened her shoulders and stepped forward, her heels clicking against the marble floor. She stopped beside Shaq, the contrast between his towering frame and her smaller stature striking. Lisa took a breath, her hands clasped in front of her. "I'll admit," she began, her voice steady but quieter than usual. "When I first heard about these changes, I wasn't exactly enthusiastic." A ripple of laughter passed through the crowd, and Lisa allowed herself a small, wry smile. "I've spent years running this store," she continued, her tone softening. "And for most of that time, I believed that exclusivity was the key to success, that creating a certain image, a certain atmosphere, was what mattered most." She paused, her gaze sweeping over the employees and customers. But over the past few days, I've started to realize that I might have been wrong. Because what really matters isn't the image we create. It's the connections we build. The way we make people feel when they walk through these doors. Shaq nodded, his expression one of quiet encouragement. Lisa drew another breath, her voice growing stronger. So I've decided to embrace these changes, to see where this new vision can take us. Because if there's one thing I've learned from all of this, it's that true luxury isn't about keeping people out. It's about inviting them in. The room erupted into applause. Employees and customers alike clapped, their faces alight with a mixture of relief and excitement. Even Kevin, who stood near the front of the group, looked stunned by Lisa's words. Lisa turned to Shaq, her smile tentative but sincere. "I hope I can still be a part of this," she said quietly. Shaq grinned, clapping a massive hand on her shoulder. "That's the spirit," he said. "Together, we're going to do something amazing here." The applause grew louder, and for the first time in years, Lisa felt something she hadn't expected. Hope. Not just for the store, but for herself. As the day went on, Shaq spent time with the employees, listening to their ideas and sharing his vision in more detail. Plans were set in motion for the mentorship programs, community events, and a grand reopening that would showcase the store's transformation. Lisa, though still adjusting to the changes, found herself engaging more with the staff. She even sat with Kevin to discuss his ideas, acknowledging his contributions with genuine appreciation. The tension that had once defined her relationships with the employees began to ease, replaced by a sense of collaboration. By the time the store closed for the day, it was clear to everyone that this wasn't just a new chapter for the store, it was the start of a whole new story. And for Lisa, it was a chance to redefine not only the business, but also herself. As she locked the doors that evening, she looked out at the bustling city street and felt a strange but welcome sense of peace. The world was changing, and for the first time, she was ready to change with it. The weeks that followed were nothing short of transformative. The store underwent a complete evolution, not just physically, but in its essence. Where once the atmosphere had been cold and detached, it now felt vibrant and welcoming. The glossy displays of luxury goods remained, but they were no longer the sole focus. Now, the store's identity revolved around its connection to the community and the people within it. Shaq's vision was evident in every detail. A sleek new section of the store was dedicated to showcasing products created by local artisans, giving emerging talent a platform alongside global luxury brands. A massive wall near the entrance now displayed a digital board, cycling through photos and stories of the people whose lives had been impacted by the store's new initiatives, scholarship recipients, young entrepreneurs, and staff members who had embraced new opportunities. In the break room, Kevin sat with a few other employees, going over ideas for an upcoming charity auction. His confidence had grown leaps and bounds, and he had become a sort of informal leader among the staff. Even Lisa had started relying on him more, recognizing his knack for creative problem-solving. "I think we could partner with a local youth program," Kevin said, gesturing to a flyer on the table. "Shaq's already talked about donating proceeds from the auction, but if we bring in some of the kids he's supporting, it'll give them a chance to shine." The others nodded, their excitement evident. Lisa, who had walked into the break room unnoticed, listened quietly for a moment before stepping forward. "That's a great idea, Kevin," she said, her voice warm. Kevin turned, his face lighting up with a mix of surprise and pride. "Thanks, Lisa. We'll work out the details and bring you a proposal." Lisa smiled. "You don't need my approval for everything," she said, her tone lighter than usual. "This is your project. Run with it." Kevin nodded, the weight of her words sinking in. The other employees exchanged glances, their respect for Lisa growing as they saw her embrace her new role. Out on the sales floor, Shaq strolled through the aisles, stopping to chat with customers and employees alike. He was a natural, his larger-than-life personality making everyone feel at ease. A young boy approached him shyly, clutching a basketball under one arm. "Mr. Shaq?" the boy asked, his voice barely audible. "Can I take a picture with you?" Shaq knelt down, his smile wide. "Of course, little man, but only if you promise me something." The boy's eyes widened. "What?" "Promise me you'll keep working hard in school," Shaq said, tapping the boy's chest lightly with one massive finger. "That's how you become a champion." The boy nodded eagerly, and his mother snapped a photo of him standing beside Shaq, both of them grinning from ear to ear. Moments like this had become common in the store, where the line between customer and community blurred in the best possible way. The initiatives Shaq had introduced, mentorship programs, community events, and staff empowerment, had turned the store into more than just a retail space. It had become a hub for connection, growth, and inspiration. Lisa, watching from the mezzanine level, felt a lump rise in her throat. The store she had spent years building was almost unrecognizable, but in the best way. For so long, she had clung to the belief that exclusivity was the pinnacle of success. But now, as she saw customers and employees alike thriving in this new environment, she realized how wrong she'd been. As if sensing her thoughts, Shaq looked up and caught her eye. He gave her a nod and a thumbs up, his grin as infectious as ever. Lisa nodded back, a genuine smile spreading across her face. That evening, as the store closed and the last customers trickled out, Shaq gathered the staff in the central lobby. The lights were dimmed and the mood was celebratory. Employees exchanged stories about the day, laughing and joking in a way that had once been unthinkable. Shaq raised a hand, silencing the room. "I just want to say how proud I am of all of you," he began, his deep voice resonating. "This store isn't just a success because of what we sell. It's a success because of the people behind it. Every single one of you." The staff erupted into cheers, clapping and whistling. Shaq continued, his grin widening. "And don't forget, this is just the beginning. We've got big plans and I know we're going to make them happen together." He paused, his gaze sweeping the room. "But there's one person I want to thank in particular," he said, his tone softening. "Lisa." The room fell quiet as all eyes turned to her. Lisa, caught off guard, looked around nervously before stepping forward. Shaq gestured for her to join him. "This woman built something incredible," Shaq said, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder. "She had the vision and the drive to make this store what it was, and now she's had the courage to embrace something new. That's not easy to do, and I respect the hell out of it." The applause that followed was thunderous. Lisa's face flushed, but she couldn't help smiling as she looked out at the people she had come to respect and care for. "Thank you," she said, her voice trembling slightly. I never thought I'd see this day, but I'm so glad I did, and I'm proud to be part of it." The cheers grew louder, and Shaq leaned down to whisper, "Told you it'd be worth it." Lisa laughed, the sound genuine and free. For the first time in years, she felt truly at peace. The store had transformed, but so had everyone inside it. From Kevin's newfound confidence to Lisa's shift in perspective, it wasn't just a place of luxury anymore. It was a place of growth, hope, and connection. And at the center of it all was Shaq, the larger-than-life figure who had reminded them all of what really mattered. As the lights dimmed and the staff began to leave, the store stood as a beacon of what was possible when vision met purpose. And for everyone involved, it was clear. This was only the beginning. The transformation of the store wasn't just about luxury or business. It was a lesson in humility, growth, and the power of community. For years, Lisa had believed that success meant creating walls, building barriers, and curating an image that excluded more than it invited. She thought prestige was about being untouchable, about staying at the top of a world where only the elite could thrive. But through Shaq's vision and the courage of her own team, she learned a powerful truth. Real success isn't about exclusivity, it's about inclusivity. Standing in the quiet store one evening after everyone had left, Lisa walked through the aisles, her footsteps echoing in the now familiar warmth of the space. The products still gleamed, the displays still radiated sophistication, but the energy was different. The store was alive in a way it had never been before. Not because of the luxury goods, but because of the people it brought together. For Kevin, the shy assistant who once doubted his own voice, this journey had shown him the strength he had within. He wasn't just an employee anymore. He was a leader, someone who inspired his peers and contributed to a greater purpose. For the other employees, it was the realization that their work could matter beyond the sale, that their efforts could change lives. And for Shaq, the entire experience was a reminder of why he did what he did. It wasn't about proving anyone wrong. It was about lifting people up. It was about showing that success meant using what you had to make a difference, whether that was money, influence, or just the courage to speak up. The store became a symbol of what was possible when people chose connection over division, purpose over profit, and humanity over ego. And for Lisa, standing in the soft glow of the storefront that evening, it wasn't just a second chance for the business. It was a second chance for herself. As she locked the doors and stepped out into the cool night air, she realized something. Success was never about keeping people out. It was about inviting them in and giving them a reason to stay. And that lesson, more than anything, was a luxury worth sharing.